believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. That as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their empire over matter. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. The War of the Worlds may be the most widely read science fiction story ever written. It was first published in 1897 as a serial in Pearson's magazine, and in book form in 1898. It has not been out of print since then, with new editions appearing regularly on bookshelves around the world. And it has inspired some dramatic variations on the theme.
A bulletin is handed me. Martian cylinders are falling all over the country.
40 years after The War of the Worlds was published, that radio play from the novel terrified thousands of Americans. And movies made from this and other books by Wells reached an even wider audience. He inspired a whole new category of fiction: science fiction. Wells and later writers in the genre aroused several generations to think about the future and look towards the stars. Today's space program owes them all a debt. Wells was not the first to imagine life from other planets, but the realism with which he described his Martians made it seem that way.
It had, for me, the kind of quality that I think later Spielberg and Lucas picked up in some of their work. The giant machines, which felt to me in reading very awkward. And I found it primitive in that respect, but at the same time awesome. Maybe for the very same reason, because they were so clunky, mechanical, and yet were able to function.
The novel follows the hero as he evades death at the hands of those invading creatures. The hero, who is never named, watches as they destroy his land, his countrymen, his world. These superior beings, behaving much as man has behaved, begin their remorseless massacre of civilization. For the most part, Wells based his stories on what science knew or thought it knew at the time. His dark vision was that just as man is mortal, so too is humanity. The danger may come from space or here on Earth. In either case, our safety on this globe is not assured. Wells feared a kind of golden rule operating in nature. He warned that we may suffer the same fate to which we have consigned other species. extinction. Hope, if any, lies in unity and scientific knowledge. The story begins with a sign in the heavens.
Hundreds of observers saw the flame that night and the night after about midnight, and again the night after, and so for 10 nights, a flame each night. Then came the night of the first falling star. It was seen early in the morning, rushing over Winchester eastward, a line of flame high in the atmosphere. Hundreds must have seen it and taken it for an ordinary falling star.
30 miles from London, near the town of Woking, a great cylinder crashes to the ground. A crowd gathers as a hatch opens, revealing creatures which look like huge brains with eyes and mouths and tentacles for limbs.
I noted a little black knot of men, the foremost of whom was waving a white flag. This was the deputation. There had been a hasty consultation, and since the Martians were evidently, in spite of their repulsive forms, intelligent creatures, it had been resolved to show them, by approaching them with signals, that we too were intelligent. Slowly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out from it.
The slaughter begins. As the townspeople scatter for their very lives, the Martian's fantastic weapon, a kind of heat ray, swings about, firing at everything that moves, until nothing moves anymore.
Suddenly, like a thing falling upon me from without, came fear. I ran, weeping silently, as a child might do.
As night falls, the Martians assemble several monster machines. Each machine is manned by a Martian brain. They begin to burn and blast their way through Woking and other towns in the direction of London. The army attacks them with its biggest guns, but it is no use. It seems clear now that all humanity is doomed.
War of the Worlds could be read, and was read, as being a parable about the possible German invasion of England. I think some other people thought of it as perhaps the British Empire was coming to an end, the frontier had closed off in North America. Where's the next frontier? It's going to be in outer space, but what if somebody is already there?
There was a kind of sadness in the gay 90s. A sense of endings was in the air. End of the century, end of Victorian England. The old was dying, but the new was being born. And it was an exciting time to be alive, especially if you were young and brilliant and in London. And the young H.G. was all of that. And he seems to have copied the contradictions of the age onto his very soul.
He was a socialist, and yet he wasn't a socialist. He hated privilege, and yet he loved hobnobbing with the rich.
He was from the very lowest edge of the middle class, semi-professional class, so that he was conscious of the problem of slipping down into the working class, but at the same time hopeful that he could rise in the class he was in.
H.G. Wells was born